Hello and welcome to the Note to File podcast, a collection of interviews, best practices, and candid commentary for clinical research sites. I'm your host, Brad Hightower, founder of Hightower Clinical, a clinical trial site network providing consulting services and end-to-end personalized research infrastructure to physicians with no upfront costs. You can learn more at hightowerclinical.com. If you're enjoying the Note to File podcast, we encourage you to rate, review, and subscribe to the show so we can continue to provide quality content to a larger audience. All show notes, episode transcripts, and contact information can be found at notetofilepodcast.com. Our guest this week is Trevor Cole, Manager for Research Quality, Monitoring, and Regulatory Affairs Service Line at Children's Mercy Research Institute in Kansas City, Missouri. Prior to this role, Trevor worked as a CRA/CRC in oncology, a CRC in gastroenterology, hepatology, and nutrition, managed a multispecialty health clinic, and worked in an emergency room. He currently holds a CCRC through ACRP and is currently working through nursing coursework, which he hopes to complete in December of 2021. In this episode, we discuss exposure to clinical research as a career at a young age, the lack of standardization, and the top-down nature of the clinical trial industry. Without further ado, Trevor Cole. All right, Trevor Cole, thanks so much for coming on today, man.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me, Brad. I've always looked into this podcast and wanted to be a part of it. So thanks for having me.
Awesome. I appreciate it. I'm glad some people out there are listening. You never know. I never am sure how much people are paying attention out there. So that's, I appreciate that. Are you, we talked a little bit earlier, are you still thawing out up there in Kansas City?
Yeah, it's been warm the past 2 days. We've had some nice spring weather, but before that we had quite a bit of snow. So we are blessed and trying to enjoy the warm weather as well we can.
Yeah, I think everybody's happy to sort of slowly start to get back to normal life. We were out for a good week, almost a week and a half with some of the ice that came in the week before that. So it's been just one more thing we don't need with everything else going on in the world right now.
Yeah, we all need to get some vitamin D with the sun. So
yeah, that's true. Get out there. Well, very cool. With all my guests, I like to just kind of start out with, tell me a little bit about how you got into clinical research. I think that, I can't say it enough. So many diverse backgrounds and sort of interesting stories I think people can relate to. So tell me a little bit about your background and sort of what brings you where you are today.
Yeah, so I kind of initially started in healthcare. So I joined this program when I was in about the 8th grade. There was this program that they had called the Area Health Education Center, or AHEC is what they called it for short. But it was this program that was funded by the state of Missouri. And you had to apply for that and interview, and then they allowed so many applicants to be part of this group. And so what you would do is monthly they would have webinars, or they would have actually in-person conferences at local hospitals. And we would learn about healthcare careers. We were each kind of assigned a counselor. And so that's really kind of where I got into healthcare in general. My mom's always worked in healthcare, so I knew that was where I wanted to go with my career. But the Area Health Education Center kind of opened my eyes to all the options within healthcare we have, and including research. So that was really the first time I even knew that research could be a career option for me, was when I became part of the AHEC group. And then I actually kind of wanted to be a physician. That was kind of my plan. I applied for this summer scholars research program in the summer between high school and getting my bachelor's undergrad. And so I was accepted into that program. And so we actually were assigned to research studies. And the one I was assigned to was coping mechanisms and stress in family caregivers of terminally ill individuals. So, early on, I got some experience consenting and recruiting participants, having that dialogue, and kind of what went into collecting data. Obviously, we were not using very much electronic stuff back then, but so I learned all that then, and I was really interested in. And I didn't really get to see the back end of that study just because it was just a summer research kind of program. But that was kind of where I really got my first hands-on experience within research.
Sure.
And then during college, I had several different healthcare roles. I worked as a dental assistant. I worked as a detox treatment attendant, which that has some interesting stories to it for sure.
I can imagine.
And then I worked in the emergency room for most of college as a technician there. Again, some really good stories. But my focus really was to try to be as well-rounded as I could, like while I was in college, and be able to get some really good experience in different healthcare fields, hoping that, I would find my passion as I was going through all that. And so really, I kind of just liked it all. I kind of liked everything. But I completed my bachelor's, and it was I did pre-med. It was kind of pre-med. They call it health sciences, but it was a pre-med degree track. And I applied for a job as a research assistant when I was completed. And I got that job at the Children's Hospital in Kansas City. And so I began working there, and it was in gastroenterology, hepatology, and nutrition. And so at that time, as a research assistant, my main focus was focusing on like study startup activities. I did some registry studies, collected blood samples, and I did some laboratory processing, and then also recruited participants for active studies, and then did some data management. So that was kind of what happened as a research assistant in that role, a lot of different things. And then about 8 months after being in that role, I transitioned. I was promoted to a clinical trials coordinator, is what they call that, at our institution. And so at our institution, the clinical trials coordinators or clinical research coordinators, they kind of manage all the processes of the study. So I know that that's different from site to site, but we did everything from startup and helping with protocol development to the consenting of the participants, collecting study visit activity and data, and then also the study closeout stuff. So yeah, we had a broad set of things that we were responsible for there. And I did that for quite some time, decided to get my MBA in healthcare management. So I started to do that, and I was offered a position as a clinic manager. So I got out of research for a little bit and was a clinic manager at a multispecialty clinic, and decided I shouldn't let that opportunity pass me by. As I was getting my MBA, I thought that would be some good experience to have under my belt, if you will. And so I did that for quite some time and finished my MBA in healthcare management. And then after about 18 months of working in that role, the company I was working for actually was about to transition and no longer had those facilities. And so I got a call from a friend that I used to work with at the Children's Hospital, and they had another research position opening. So I went back there I entered at a little higher level. So
sure.
We have the levels we had at the hospital was a 1 and a 2. And so clinical trials coordinator 1 and 2. And so I entered as a 2. And again, that was in gastroenterology, hepatology, nutrition, doing a little bit different work at that point in time. We had some I&D studies, and so a little more complexities in that role. I did a lot of it. The manager left there, so I had a lot of interim management experience within research during that time. They looked for someone to fill that role. And then after about 2 years in that role, I had actually transitioned internally to be a CRA within our oncology department. And so I always wanted to, get that experience of oncology on the research side, because it is a different world. That's for sure.
Right.
And so I was able to transition over there, and I was completing my postmaster's certificate in project management while I was working in that role as well, which has been beneficial throughout my career to have those skills in project management. So I worked in oncology, and I loved the work that I was doing there. We did a lot of COG studies, our children's oncology group. If you don't know what COG is. And, it was definitely a tough role to be in. You have to see these kiddos in these extremely horrible circumstances.
Right.
But, at the same time, we got to be engaged with them and give them hope, which was amazing. So, I loved that role. And I worked over there for a while. And then this position that I'm in now opened, and it just felt like it was kind of meant to be. Because during my whole career, I was very interested in improvement. So, as a coordinator, as part of a small organization, there were a lot of things that we didn't have. We didn't have standardized processes. We didn't have a lot of templates or forms. We didn't have really good processes to follow or SOPs. And so I feel like over time, I kind of focused on what can we do to improve the current state of how we're doing our work. And so that was kind of one of the things that helped me decide that, I wanted to move into this new role as the research quality program manager at where I'm at now. And so since joining that program, which I've been managing that program for about 2 years now, over those 2 years, we've doubled our monitoring efforts that we're doing internally, and we expanded to include other quality offerings outside of just our routine monitoring that we would do that's risk-based. We've developed a lot of SOPs, some standardizing guidances. We've standardized some of our internal ISF filing practices. That was a big project we worked on. And then also developed a lot of quality management tools and a framework to utilize. So that is, currently kind of my background in research in general. And again, kind of my background in healthcare, which has been really a focus to try to get a little bit of everything in my toolbox.
Yeah, no, I mean, it sounds like it was a, sort of long and circuitous route. I mean, I love that, you're exposed at least to the idea of clinical research at such a young age. I know when I first got into clinical research, I was like, what the hell is this? I've never heard of this before,
Yeah.
So, that's really cool to at least have that, sort of knowledge in your back pocket, at such a young age. And then I can only imagine how all those different roles along the way kind of helped prepare you if you can be in an emergency room or in a detox center situation, then you can probably handle, the pressure of dealing with a complex protocol a lot more easier than, somebody who hasn't had that sort of clinical experience.
Yeah, you absolutely have to be agile and be ready to adjust and adapt as things come, which has been, even more, I think, helpful recently with the pandemic. We've had to do that in research. But research is always changing. That's nothing new. So you always have to be able to adapt and change to your protocol. So yeah, I think that definitely has helped.
Yeah, I think it's been, if there's a silver lining in the whole pandemic, I think it's that it has pushed everyone to do things a little bit differently. And, predictably, it can sometimes be a mess because you've got sponsors trying to do things differently using different systems. But I think the idea that at least everyone is saying, hey, we need to bring something new to the table to keep these projects going, because you can't drop everything, just because, of the pandemic. There's other people that need help. There are other diseases and illnesses that continue to exist. And it's just been a super interesting year, watching things sort of slowly evolve as, the pandemic sort of lingered on.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's been like, with all the kind of push towards decentralized trials, and all that, I think we'll be seeing a lot more even standardizing guidances and practices that are coming out around that. But with telehealth in general, there's just so many complexities, so many, I think even in the healthcare realm, they haven't been able to come up with great practices around that just because there's not standardizing regulations from state to state. And so that's kind of been a barrier even within healthcare. We had a story where, we had a family that had to have a telehealth visit and they had to just drive across the state line to have that visit and then drive back. So they were in a parking lot literally having their telehealth visit and they just drove back across to the state line to their home. So
yeah, that's crazy.
So it's interesting, that I think that not just research can learn something, but healthcare in general, we can take a lot from this experience and hopefully improve processes for our patients. At the end of the day, what matters is the care we're providing, right? And if we can't do that because of these barriers, we need better policies and regulations around that.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's absolutely true. It's all about how I think we can improve the experience for the patient. And again, I think it's super promising. If you look, I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. I mean, it's a huge topic of conversation. It's everybody's putting a lot of time and energy into improving the patient experience, whether it be through, increasing diversity or decentralized trials and all the different things that entails. So I think we're on the way, and I can't see things really going backwards at this point. I say that, and I'm going to knock on proverbial wood because, who knows, crazier things have happened, but it seems like we've at least had the catalyst to really push things and continue to improve that connection with patients. So again, it's if nothing else, it's a little bit of the silver lining of the last, 12, 15 months.
Absolutely. And we've seen like all this synergy around it too, which is nice from, so many different stakeholders have kind of embraced it. So that's kind of nice to see.
Well, yeah, I mean, I work at a site level like you do. So I find it a little bit like puzzling sometimes. Like if pharma wanted to change things, I mean, they could do it.
Yeah.
Right. They've got the resources, they've got the money, it's in their best interest, really. So it's just a little bit, befuddling to me that it hasn't happened sooner or quicker. And maybe I'm being, cynical, but there seems like it's just odd to me that the people who really hold the purse strings and who have the most to gain, haven't been more proactive in doing these things. Because, at a site level, we are pretty much at the mercy of what sponsors tell us to do to a large degree, not always, but, we can't just use any EDC we want. We can't just use any ECOA we want. We are using what they give us to use.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely, and each internal, I know we have so many resources around, even looking at, say there's a new EDC we're going to be having to use from a sponsor or a new e-consent platform. There's so many internal resources, even at a site level, that go into that, into, making sure that it fits. We are a covered entity, so HIPAA applies to us. So making sure it fits within, what we can use to and what risk we're willing to take as an organization. So
right.
I think that's been definitely a complicating factor, as well as, making sure there's so many options. There's been so many options that have popped up of systems that you can use for, e-regulatory or EDCs. There's so many options out there. And so making sure we're all picking the same one, because if we pick different ones, they may not be able to integrate with each other. And so
right.
That's been another big complication, I think, of technology that we'll probably eventually see change, because that's what's going to have to happen at some point, is we're going to all have to standardize what we're utilizing to make sure it's in the best interest of all of our resources.
Yeah, and that's a really fair point. I think it might just be where we are in the timeline. Like right now, everyone's jumping up with a new solution, but eventually there's going to have to be some consolidation, because again, you don't want to have 50 CTMSs and you don't want to have 200 EDC systems, because it's just ridiculous. I mean, it's ridiculous the amount there are before all this happened, having to have 50 different passwords saved for all the different systems and all the different studies that you're working on seems just archaic. It's nuts.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Sam, I'm curious to know a little bit about your role now. Are you able to sort of help standardize what goes on within the multiple or various departments within, like, your institute, for example?
Yeah. So I'll tell you a little bit about just the program itself. So we've had the program at the hospital since 2015, and it's similar to your traditional. They started out similar to your traditional PAM programs or post-approval monitoring, and it's kind of morphed into being a little more than that. But the program initially took, there's a risk algorithm that we use to score studies that are coming through our institutional review board. And so we score those for those risk categories that we have set. And then we do monitoring based off of those high risk studies. And those, we call that routine monitoring. So we'll just go through, and it's a little bit different than if your sponsor was to come in and monitor, because we're not just looking, at the study itself, but we're also looking at adherence to internal policies within our institution. And so it's a really good opportunity to support the study teams, in a way that's
right.
non-punitive. We're there to help them and give them the tools that they need. It's also a great way to educate in real person. I know, for me in research, mentorship is huge. I was lucky enough to have a CRA when I was young in my clinical research experience. I had a CRA who was very hands-on and helping me and explaining things to me. And so I really wanted to make sure in our role that I'm in now, that we actually are the same way with our study teams, and that we provide them with good rationale to help them understand and then improve when they do the next study. So what we do after that is we kind of do, we'll go in and do 2 days typical of our monitoring, depending on the study. Sometimes it's longer, but we monitor on study management, subject management, and data management. So we're kind of looking at all those areas of the study, and then we zoom in on areas of high risk. So those errors that matter, that's kind of what we're trying to focus on when we're doing our assessments. And then we kind of meet with the teams and go over, any observations that we may find or opportunities for improvement, best practices. As an institution, that's one of, that's a hard part, is we have things that are regulations that we have to follow. We have guidances, and then we have best practices. And so, best practices may vary from site to site. And that's something that we've been able to really try to adjust and come up with what's our best practice as a site. And that changes, right? I mean, as new technologies emerge or new process improvements emerge, we may be able to implement new best practices. So that's been another big piece of our program. And so since then, we also have added in, we do quality kind of startup.
Yeah, absolutely.
Consultations where we'll meet with study teams to be proactive in their quality management. And then we're going to, obviously focus on mitigating any of those errors that would matter in the research that we're doing, so that we can focus on that production of our high quality research. So we try to do that prospectively as well, because typically when we're doing monitoring, we're hitting, a study somewhere in their life cycle of already starting to recruit. So we may find some things that it would have been nice to know that before, right? And so we try to add this option in for consultation early on. And kind of the next step is to embed that into culture, right? So not just have that as an option through our QMP, our research quality monitoring program, but to also have that as a part of what we do every single day in the research that we're doing. So to have solid scientific merit and feasibility processes embedded early on that also focus on quality. So that quality by design component, looking at that early on in study development, as you can adjust, you may be able to adjust the protocol early on to avoid having potential errors down the road.
Right. So are you guys primarily more working with like external pharma sponsors, or are these mostly grant funded or investigator initiated type trials?
Yeah, so we do all of it actually. So we have a lot of investigator initiated type of trials, but we also have a lot of sponsored and a lot of grant funded research. So we do a little bit of all of that when we do our research monitoring. Most of our quality supports have been investigator initiated type of studies, just because those are the ones that usually, they're building those from the ground up. And so they do need a little bit more support.
Right.
And experience. And if you've never developed or even seen, really good sponsored protocols, then sometimes you don't know what you may need or what you may be missing. And so that's something we can kind of bring to those teams and consult with them on adding, hey, if you would add this to your protocol, you would possibly mitigate any risk down the road. But yeah, we do a lot of monitoring also on the sponsored studies. Even if they're monitored externally by the CRO, we still come in and do our internal monitoring on those types of studies, because we still find errors that would be something or opportunities for improvement that would be something we could adjust or to discuss with the study team. And then we can bring that back to our institutional level at research administration and say, here's the data we're seeing kind of across the board. Maybe we can institute educational opportunities or new policies or SOPs that can help move this thing that we're currently in the red on into the green or something like that. So we can kind of hopefully change over time to improve those gaps that we see.
Yeah. And I mean, I love that, especially being sort of, very prospective. I think, I work now primarily with pharma and device companies. I used to work a little bit with, investigator-initiated trials. I know they can be different beasts, but, they also share a lot of similarities. But, so often I think you get a protocol, even if it's a great protocol from a CRO or sponsor, and there's a lot to consider when you're getting ready to start a trial. And I think we have all also seen that sometimes you don't know what you don't know until you really get into the meat sort of of the study.
Yeah.
So having sometimes some outside perspective, or a perspective that's, obviously specifically trained to look at and anticipate these things, can go a long ways. And then especially when you're dealing with different departments who may have slightly different practices, and being able to sort of, again, standardize those things as much as possible. I mean, that's a huge benefit. I know for me, operating, multiple sites, that's something that I struggle with and really need to continue to strengthen, is sort of keeping some standardization across multiple sites, just because it's that sort of Kaizen concept of like continuous improvement. And then, like you said, taking it back to the top and saying, okay, this is what we're seeing. These are our trends. What resources can we use to fix these and make them more efficient? So, I love that sort of continuous improvement model. I mean, I think that speaks a lot to, what you and your institution are trying to do.
Yeah. And I think in research, like this idea of lessons learned and how do we capture that? I think we definitely still have yet to be great at that at our institution. And I'm sure other institutions struggle with that too, is how do we take all this knowledge that all of our study teams have and all the lessons that they come with that they may know that someone else may not, and how do we consolidate that into some sort of knowledge management system to share across the institution and, really help impact the quality of what we're doing and the logistics, because there's so many stakeholders within research. I oftentimes kind of refer to it as like, you're juggling stuff, and there's so many, the more balls you add to that you're juggling, you're eventually going to drop something if you don't have, solid processes and that you're going to be continuously checking in on those things. So research is not an easy career, but it definitely is something, we can manage if we're doing that prospectively and we're really focused on the planning of the study itself.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. And I think that's sometimes lost on, I know it's been lost on me at different points in my career, is, again, sitting down, bringing everybody to the table and saying, all right, let's work through this before we, get up and go. And that alone can sometimes save you, some pretty big headaches.
Yeah, I had this one teacher when I was in my project management postmaster's certificate program, and he would say, we have three options. We can have things good, fast, or cheap, and we only get two of those.
Yeah, pick two, right?
I always use that kind of terminology when I'm talking to our investigators, and especially, at the site level, and you were familiar with this, is, sometimes those resources are slim. And so we have to have good. That's a given, right? So the only two things we can adjust are cheap and then resources or time. So those are kind of the things that we can wax and wane or change to keep that that good there in the middle, that quality.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So if you were to share a best practice with other sites, if even if it's something broad, like what's something that you would share with other sites as a sort of general best practice?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's important with best practices in general is definitely to start with clear expectations. So look at your mission and vision. Make sure that you're going to be living that out in your best practices, right? Whatever your mission and vision is for your organization. And then set those clear expectations in your job descriptions, making sure that we have solid training. That's another piece. And then focus on what matters most within our operations. So those are the things I think to start with, high level. And then you kind of want to standardize your internal practices. So I think that's key to consistent high quality delivery, right? Of any product is standardization. Establish some sort of reporting framework, and then facilitate support as well at all of those levels, and then engage all of the team members. So I think that's sometimes what gets missed is not engaging all the stakeholders in what's going on and setting those best practices, and then also just being transparent and then focusing on that continuous improvement. So knowing that your best practices are going to change over time, just building a system that is agile, will be helpful. And then just benchmark as much as possible too. I think that's another important piece of any best practice development is benchmarking. That's your literature search and you're collecting all that information, and you're kind of compiling it and saying what fits here, what doesn't fit here, because you're ultimately trying to create best practices for your environment. And then also, I think it's important to use that data to drive those initiatives and priorities within your operations. So that's kind of my, advice on best practices in general.
Right. No, I love it. I think that's that's very encompassing and succinct at the same time. I mean, I don't think I can even add to that. That's perfect.
I think sometimes it gets missed, right? Like the HR pieces of what we do is just as important. That's important to culture, and culture is important to how we do our work. And so I think that plays into best practices. Some people may not see how that fits, but to me, it definitely does. And that we engage our, all of our teammates in what we're doing. And that, again, will create best practices and that culture of understanding.
Yeah, I mean, and sometimes I think it's as easy as just communication, constant communication. I think that's always sometimes undervalued in what we do, especially when there are, again, so many different stakeholders when it comes to these complex, trials that we do.
Yeah, we have. There's this presentation I do, and I show all the stakeholders and that we have within research, just to help people understand that there's so many we don't think about, right? We have, our institutional review board is a stakeholder, our outside regulators, and most importantly, the public in general. Those journal publishing entities that we're publishing to, that's another one that people don't even think about as a stakeholder. So there's just so many stakeholders involved that I think sometimes we forget, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's never bad to have a reminder of, all the people involved. I love it. So what are some resources that you use, or maybe some things you find indispensable, whether they be, a book, software, some kind of process, or, anything else? What's something you'd share with the community that's really helped you be the best at what you do?
Yeah, so I love systems that work for me, right? I mean, I think we all do. And so Smartsheets is one of my favorite technologies that I like to use. I don't know if you've ever used that, Brad, but
no, I don't think I have.
Smartsheets is it's pretty much a very sophisticated Excel, but it can automate a lot of functions for you. And so that's probably one of my favorite tools that we use within what we do. RedCap is another really great tool that I know a lot of people use out there, and it's freely available. And it has so many amazing attributes to it. So I'm a big fan of Red Cap. And then I kind of also think that the FDA BIMO, observations I think are great to look at, and especially in my kind of field, to look at those and be able to benchmark. But really, even in operations or as a coordinator, to be able to look at, okay, what is happening out there? What is happening in the observations that the FDA is seeing, and how can I potentially impact that at our site and make sure that we're hitting those big observations. And then I also think we have a couple organizations we always look at. So, CITI, obviously, the Clinical Trials Transformation Initiative, they always have so many great resources. Their quality by design initiatives are amazing for anyone to kind of look at and utilize, especially if you don't have any sort of quality framework, at your institution. That's a good place to kind of start. And then I also think Transcelerate has a good quality management system kind of guidance. So that's another great resource. And then listservs. I think that there's so many listservs out there that people probably don't even know about of organizations or all these groups that have kind of come together and tried to impact something. So I know that at the site level, like we have a clinicaltrials.gov task force. And so, listservs like that, or the Research Compliance Network, those type of listservs or networks are just so valuable because you get input from so many different leaders at other organizations. And so for me, that has been, just a great learning opportunity in my career as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know that I've checked out kind of listserv world. It's been some time since I've even heard listserv being used. So we may have to, I want to talk about that maybe a little bit offline. I'm going to get some tips from you there on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
But ultimately, it sounds like that's about, reaching into and sort of leveraging community and network, to sort of get other people's perspectives and thoughts. So, and again, I think that's something that's extremely important in what we do, is not staying siloed as much as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's important, right? There's a world outside of our institutions and our organization. And sometimes that's the most valuable because we get a different input that we maybe wouldn't have otherwise. And then, I think another piece that's just been so valuable in my career that's totally outside of all these other resources we just talked about, but is some sort of positivity or leadership training. And, so I think for me, it kind of started with John Gordon has these books that he's wrote, and one of them is The Energy Bus. And so I think starting with that as well as adding that as part of your leadership growth and learning about how to incorporate positivity into your daily work, that's just helped me be able to establish good relationships, work on my soft skills, which is so important to research. And sometimes I think it's forgotten that soft skills are so important.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And that's a great point. Without getting too, into the weeds, I do think mindset plays a gigantic role in what we do and, the level of success. And obviously there's all kinds of different, philosophies and programs and different ways of thinking. But just the fact that, you found something that relates to you is awesome. And again, I don't think anyone's mentioned that yet on the podcast. So I'm actually really stoked that that's something you bring up, because again, I think that's sort of something that goes under the radar for a lot of people. I love that.
Absolutely.
Well, very cool. Well, tell me where people can find you online. Yeah,
so I am on LinkedIn. The name's Trevor Cole, and then also by email. So I have my email is Cole, COLE, consulting, kc@gmail.com. So those are kind of the best ways to contact me. LinkedIn's the best, obviously, but email is a good option as well.
Awesome. And we'll make sure to post that up on show notes. Anything to say before we go?
Thank you for having me, Brad. I appreciate it. It's always good to talk to you, and just keep doing what you're doing and impacting all those young researchers out there or experienced researchers that just want to learn a little bit more. So just thank you for what you're doing. And thank you for having me.
I appreciate it. Thanks for coming on, man. We'll talk again soon.
No problem. Have a good one.
You too. Thank you for listening to the Note to File podcast. All show notes, episode transcripts, and contact information can be found at notetofilepodcast.com. And again, please don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Thanks again for listening.